If you asked me a year ago if I would ever be sitting in my own living room, sipping black coffee while my own brother tried to legally steal my life's work, I would have laughed. But here I am. The morning after my parents looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer their son, my brother Declan showed up at my door with a slick lawyer in a cheap suit. He threw a thick stack of legal documents onto my coffee table and sneered, saying it is time to hand it over, Holden, because you owe this family everything. I stared at him, feeling a deep, profound sickness in my gut. They did not just want to erase me from their lives. They wanted to strip me of everything I had built from nothing. You might be wondering how a family dispute escalates into a hostile corporate takeover. To understand the sheer audacity of my brother, you have to understand the foundation of dirt our family was built on. My name is Holden. I am 32 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have been a ghost. Not by choice, but by design. To the outside world, I am just a quiet guy who lives in a modest apartment, drives a 7-year-old sedan, and works in IT. My neighbors think I fix computers for a living. My family thinks I am a disappointment who failed to grasp the grand ambitions they hold so dear. The reality is vastly different. I am the founder and CEO of CipherNet, an enterprise security software firm currently valued at over $50 million. I do not wear tailored suits. I do not drive imported sports cars. I do not wear watches that cost more than a college tuition. I keep my head down, I build my company, and I let the work speak for itself. I learned very early on that showing success in my family only painted a target on my back. My parents, Garrison and Blythe, have always had a clear hierarchy. At the very top, bathed in golden light, was my older brother Declan. At the bottom, usually tasked with cleaning up the mess, was me. I was the invisible child. If I achieved something, it was ignored. If I made a mistake, it was amplified and dissected at the dinner table for weeks. Let me take you back to the very first artifact in my Museum of Pain. I was 16 years old. I had spent 6 months teaching myself how to code on a second-hand desktop that sounded like a jet engine taking off. I entered a regional software development competition and, to my genuine shock, I won first place. The prize was $2,000 in cash. For a 16-year-old kid who had never seen more than $20 at once, it was life-changing. I ran home, clutching that giant novelty check, bursting with a pride I had never felt before. I thought, finally, this is the moment Garrison and Blythe will look at me and smile. I walked into the kitchen. My mother was chopping vegetables. My father was reading a magazine. I slammed the check on the counter and breathlessly explained what I had done. Garrison slowly lowered his magazine, looked at the check, then looked at me. He did not say congratulations. He did not ask about the software. He said, "Your brother needs a down payment for a new car." I remember the air leaving my lungs. Declan had totaled his previous car 2 weeks prior because he was texting while driving. And now, my prize money, the reward for countless sleepless nights, was being confiscated to reward his negligence. I tried to argue. I told them it was my money, that I earned it, that I wanted to save it for college. Blythe stopped chopping, pointed her knife at me, and said, "We put a roof over your head and food in your stomach. Holden, you are being incredibly selfish. Your brother has a social life to maintain. You sit in a dark room all day. What do you even need money for?" They took the check. They cashed it. Declan got a shiny new coupe, and he did not even say thank you. He just tossed me the keys to his old, dented bicycle and told me to get some exercise. I learned that day that my victories would never be mine in that house. They would only ever be fuel for Declan's fire. I thought that was the worst they could do. I was wrong. The real theft was still 20 years away. Growing up in Declan's shadow was like living in an eclipse. Nothing could grow in the dark, so I had to find my own light. When it was time for college, Garrison and Blythe happily drained their savings to send Declan to an elite, ridiculously expensive private university. They bought him a luxury loft near campus, funded his fraternity dues, and essentially paid for a 4-year vacation. Meanwhile, I was told I needed to build character. I went to a local state college, paying my own way by working 3 separate jobs. I flipped burgers, I tutored rich kids in math, and I worked the graveyard shift at a server farm. Declan dropped out in his junior year. He claimed higher education was stifling his entrepreneurial spirit. He came back home, proclaiming himself a startup visionary. His first venture was a custom energy drink company that failed in 6 months. His second was an exclusive networking app that never even made it to the App Store. Each time, my parents bailed him out, insisting he was just ahead of his time. During this period, I was quietly building the first iteration of what would become CipherNet. I needed $500 to lease a dedicated server for my prototype. I knew better than to ask my parents. Instead, I went to my Uncle Callum. Callum was the black sheep of the family, mostly because he saw right through Garrison and Blythe's nonsense. He listened to my pitch, asked 3 extremely sharp questions, and handed me 5 crisp $100 bills. He told me to make him proud and keep my mouth shut about it. That $500 was the only seed money I ever took. I built the architecture, secured my first 3 enterprise clients before I even graduated, and never looked back. By the time I was 28, the company was thriving. I had a team of 50 employees, a dedicated office space across town, and multi-million-dollar contracts. But to my family, I was still just the guy who played with computers. The Thanksgiving dinner of that year remains etched in my mind as a masterpiece of irony. I arrived at my parents' house wearing a plain gray sweater and jeans. Declan showed up in a tailored suit, fresh from a supposed real estate seminar. He had recently pivoted to luxury property development, though as far as I could tell, his only real skill was spending our parents' retirement funds on shiny brochures. Throughout dinner, Declan dominated the conversation. He talked loudly about zoning laws, venture capital, and networking with city officials. Garrison poured him a glass of expensive scotch, beaming with pride. Blythe kept patting Declan's arm, telling everyone who would listen that her son was going to reshape the city skyline. Then, Declan turned his attention to me. He swirled his scotch, leaned back in his chair, and offered a condescending smile. "So, Holden," he said loudly, "still doing the computer repair thing? You really should think about scaling up. Real money is in real estate, Holden. You will figure it out when you are done playing with code. Maybe one day I can hire you to set up the Wi-Fi in my new condo lobbies." The entire table chuckled. My Aunt Marin whispered something to my cousin Grady, and they both smirked. Garrison shook his head, looking at me with profound pity. "You really should listen to your brother, Holden," Garrison said. "He understands how the world works. You cannot hide behind a screen forever." I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I just took a sip of my water, reached into my pocket, and discreetly checked my phone under the table. The notification was sitting right there on my lock screen. A massive corporate contract had just cleared. At that exact moment, as my brother mocked me for being a glorified repairman, my personal net worth had officially crossed the $10 million mark. I looked up at Declan, who was still grinning like he had just delivered the ultimate punchline. I smiled back, a genuine, warm smile. I told him I would keep that in mind. I let him have his laugh. But a storm was brewing in Declan's real estate empire, and he was about to need an umbrella only I could sell. Fast forward to the present day. I was sitting in my office, reviewing an acquisition offer for a smaller tech firm, when my phone buzzed. It was Blythe. She rarely called unless she needed tech support or someone to carry heavy boxes out of the attic. This time, her voice was strained, tight with an anxiety I rarely heard from her. She demanded I come to their house immediately. "It is an emergency, Holden," she snapped before hanging up. I drove over, expecting to find a broken water heater or a crashed laptop. Instead, I walked into the living room to find an impromptu family tribunal. Garrison was pacing near the fireplace. Blythe was sitting on the sofa, clutching a tissue, and Declan was slouched in an armchair, looking like a cornered animal. He looked terrible. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by wrinkled clothes, and he had dark circles under his eyes. "Sit down," Garrison ordered as soon as I entered. I remained standing. "What is going on?" I asked. Declan refused to look at me. Blythe stood up, wringing her hands. "Your brother has run into a slight cash flow problem with his latest luxury condo development," she said, trying to make it sound like a minor inconvenience. The bank is being entirely unreasonable. They are halting construction unless he can secure additional backing. I felt a cold prickle of realization. How much? I asked. Declan finally looked up. $5 million, he muttered. I almost laughed out loud. $5 million? You expect me to just magically produce $5 million? You think the computer repair guy has that hiding in his mattress? Garrison stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Do not be insolent, Holden. We know you do not have that kind of cash. But you have excellent credit, no debt, and a stable income. The bank just needs a guarantor. A cosigner to assume the risk so they can release the funds to Declan. All you have to do is sign your name. They wanted me to sign a guarantee for $5 million. I stood there, taking in the sheer madness of the request. But here is the thing they did not know. CipherNet builds security and data analysis tools. I have access to public financial records, court filings, and corporate debt registries. A few weeks prior, out of pure curiosity, I had run a background sweep on Declan's development company. I already knew the truth. His project was not facing a slight cash flow problem. It was a massive, gaping black hole. He owed contractors, he owed the city, and he was facing 2 separate lawsuits for breach of contract. The project was practically dead, and signing that paper would tie an anchor around my neck and drag me straight to the bottom of the ocean with him. I looked Garrison right in the eyes. No, I said firmly. The room went dead silent. Blythe dropped her tissue. Declan stood up, his face contorting into a mask of pure rage. What do you mean, no? Declan demanded. I mean, I am not signing anything, I replied. Your project is underwater, Declan. I am not ruining my financial future because you do not know how to manage a budget. Garrison stepped into my personal space, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. You are his brother, he bellowed. This family helps each other. We supported you your entire life. You took my competition money to buy him a car. I shot back, the old anger finally breaking through my carefully maintained calm. You paid for his private college while I worked night shifts. You have never supported me. You only ever demanded I sacrifice for him. The answer is no. I will not sign. Blythe started crying, loud, dramatic sobs meant to guilt-trip me. How can you be so cold? She wailed. If you do not sign, he will lose everything. We will be ruined. Let me ask you guys, what would you have done? Would you sign away your life for a brother who never respected you? Drop a comment because I am still blown away by what happened next. I turned around and walked toward the front door. Behind me, the shouting reached a fever pitch. Garrison was screaming about loyalty, about duty, about how I was a selfish, ungrateful son. I reached for the doorknob, feeling a heavy weight settling on my shoulders. I knew this was a breaking point. My parents exploded in anger, preparing to make a ruthless decision that would change the trajectory of our lives forever. Do not walk out that door, Holden, Garrison roared, his voice echoing in the hallway. If you walk out on your brother now, do not ever bother coming back. You hear me? You are no son of mine. Blythe stood next to him, tears streaming down her face, nodding in agreement. You are dead to us, Holden, she spat. I am ashamed I raised someone so entirely devoid of empathy. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. The words stung undeniably. Even when you know your parents are toxic, hearing them officially discard you still feels like a physical blow to the chest. But beneath the pain, there was something else. Relief. The chains were finally off. I looked at the 3 of them one last time. Goodbye, I said quietly, and closed the door behind me. I drove back to my apartment in a daze. I did not cry. I just felt empty. I had officially been disowned for refusing to be a sacrificial lamb. I spent the rest of the evening staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had become so incredibly broken. But while I was sitting in silence, fate was busy setting off a stick of dynamite on the other side of town. Later that same night, Declan attended a high society networking gala. He was desperately trying to find an angel investor to replace the bank funds he could not get. He was working the room, handing out his glossy brochures, pretending he was not drowning in debt. According to witnesses, He cornered a prominent venture capitalist named Soren near the open bar. Soren is a sharp guy. He is the kind of investor who knows everyone and everything in the tech and real estate sectors. Declan launched into his desperate pitch, but Soren waved him off. "Hale, right?" Soren asked, squinting at Declan's name tag. "You are Holden Hale's brother." Declan, probably annoyed at being recognized as my sibling for the first time in his life, gave a tight nod. "Yeah. Holden is my younger brother. He works in IT." Soren burst out laughing. "Works in IT? Is that what he tells you guys? That is hilarious. Your brother is the founder of CipherNet. I have been trying to buy a piece of his equity for 2 years. The guy built a $50 million fortress and refuses to take outside capital. He is a genius. Anyway, I am not interested in your condos. Declan, have a good night." I can only imagine the color draining from Declan's face as he stood by that bar, holding his worthless brochures. The brother he had mocked, the brother he thought was a penniless computer repairman, was sitting on a mountain of gold. If Declan had an ounce of decency, he would have felt ashamed. He would have realized why I refused to sign that loan, recognizing that I actually understood finance far better than he did. But decency is not a currency my brother trades in. Instead of remorse, Soren's accidental revelation sparked a twisted, desperate greed in Declan's mind. He did not call our parents to tell them the news. He did not call me to apologize. Instead, he went back to his luxury apartment, poured a drink, and started formulating a plan. In his warped mind, my success was an insult. How dare I have millions while he was failing? How dare I withhold my wealth from the golden child? By the time the sun came up, Declan had convinced himself of a dangerous delusion. He convinced himself that CipherNet did not belong to me. It belonged to the family. And since I had just been officially disowned and exiled from that family, my assets needed to be reclaimed by the rightful heir. I went to sleep an orphan by choice. I woke up the target of a corporate heist orchestrated by my own blood. The knock on my door came at 7 in the morning. It was loud, aggressive, and unrelenting. I dragged myself out of bed, still wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, and peered through the peephole. I blinked, sure I was hallucinating. It was Declan, and standing next to him was a man in a cheap, shiny suit carrying a leather briefcase. I opened the door, keeping the chain engaged. "What do you want, Declan?" "Open the door, Holden," Declan said, his voice brimming with a smug, arrogant confidence I had not seen since his Thanksgiving speech. "We have business to discuss." I unhooked the chain and let them in. Declan strolled into my living room like he owned the place, looking around at my modest furniture with a sneer of disgust. He turned to me and smirked. "Hiding $50 million and you still buy your couches at a discount store. That is just sad, Holden." My blood ran cold. Soren. I knew immediately that Soren must have opened his mouth at the gala. I crossed my arms. "Say what you came to say and get out." The man in the suit stepped forward and slapped a thick manila folder onto my coffee table. "I am Mr. Vance, legal counsel for your brother," he said in a nasal voice. "We are here to formally serve you with a demand for the transfer of controlling shares of CipherNet to the Hale Family Trust, represented by Declan Hale." I stared at the folder, then at Declan, and then I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked. "CipherNet is a privately held LLC. I am the sole founder and 100% equity owner. You have no legal standing, no shares, and no claim. Get out of my house." Declan's smirk widened. "Actually, little brother, we do. You see, when you started this little project, you took a $500 seed loan from Uncle Callum. Callum is a member of the Hale family. Therefore, the initial capital was sourced from family funds, making CipherNet a family business asset. And since Mom and Dad officially disowned you last night, revoking your status as a family member in good standing, the assets revert to the primary heir." Me. I was stunned. Not by the legal threat, which was so flimsy a first-year law student could tear it apart, but by the sheer, staggering delusion required to string that logic together. He actually believed this would work. He thought he could bully me into handing over a $50 million tech firm based on a $500 loan from an uncle he did not even like. It is time to hand it over, Holden, Declan said, stepping closer. You owe this family. You sign the transfer papers now, and I will be generous. I will let you stay on as head of IT. I will even clear your name with Mom and Dad. But the company is mine now. It is the only way to save my real estate deals. I looked at the paperwork. I looked at the cheap lawyer. And then I pulled out my phone and hit speed dial. Who are you calling? Declan asked, his smirk faltering slightly. Reese, I said as the call connected. Reese is my director of physical security. He is also a former military contractor who stands 6'4" and does not have a sense of humor. Hey Reese, I said into the phone. I need you at my apartment. I have 2 trespassers who seem to be lost. Yes, bring the zip ties just in case. Declan took a step back. You think you can intimidate me? I am your older brother. You don't own me. Declan, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. You never did. And you sure as hell do not own my company. Take your garbage paperwork and get out of my apartment before Reese throws you off the balcony. The lawyer nervously picked up his briefcase and backed toward the door. Declan's face turned purple. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You are going to regret this, Holden, he screamed as he retreated into the hallway. I already filed an emergency injunction. I am freezing your assets. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee by noon tomorrow. I slammed the door in his face. Declan threatened outside, claiming he filed to freeze assets, leaving me standing in the quiet of my living room, the battle lines officially drawn. The moment Declan's footsteps faded down the hallway, the adrenaline left my system, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. He wanted a war over a company he did not build, using a family he was currently bankrupting. Fine. I walked over to my laptop, opened a secure encrypted channel, and contacted my actual legal team. Not cheap strip mall lawyers, but a heavy-hitting corporate defense firm I kept on retainer. I got my lead counsel on a video call within 10 minutes. I explained the situation, the $500 loan from Callum, the disownment, and the threat of an asset freeze. My lawyer let out a dry chuckle. An injunction based on a verbal loan from an uncle? No judge is going to freeze a $50 million enterprise over that. But they can create a massive headache with discovery requests and subpoenaing your clients just to spook them. We need to counterfile immediately. Harassment, frivolous litigation, the works. Do it, I said. But I want to know everything about Declan's current financial situation. If he is desperate enough to try a corporate hijacking, he is hiding something catastrophic. I spent the next 48 hours doing what I do best. I gathered data, using public property records, court registries, and municipal tax filings. I built a comprehensive map of Declan's real estate empire. It was worse than I thought. He was not just failing, he was actively committing financial suicide. He had leveraged properties against each other, created shell companies to hide toxic debt, and defaulted on 3 separate vendor payments. But the real shock, the plot twist that made my stomach churn, came when I looked at the collateral for his latest legal retainer and the desperate bridge loans he had taken out over the last 30 days. He did not use his own assets. He did not have any left. He had forged Garrison's signature to take out a massive second mortgage on our parents' house. Furthermore, he had quietly drained their retirement accounts, transferring the funds into an LLC under his name to show false liquidity to his remaining investors. My parents, the people who had disowned me for refusing to help their golden boy, were currently sitting in a house the bank was about to repossess, living on a retirement fund that no longer existed. They were completely, profoundly broke, and they had absolutely no idea. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glowing monitors. I could pick up the phone right then. I could call Garrison and Blythe, warn them, and expose Declan. It would stop the lawsuit immediately because my parents would tear him apart. It was the decent thing to do. But then I remembered the Thanksgiving dinner. I remembered the 16-year-old kid forced to hand over his prize money. I remembered Blythe looking me in the eye and saying I was devoid of empathy. Garrison roaring that I was no son of his. They had chosen their golden child over and over again, shielding him from consequences, enabling his arrogance, and feeding me to the wolves to keep him warm. If I warned them now, they would just find a way to blame me. They would scramble to protect him like they always did. No, they wanted a life with only their perfect son. I was going to let them have exactly what they asked for. I decided to remain silent. I would defend my company fiercely in court, but I would not say a word about the second mortgage. I would let them eat the bitter fruit they had spent 30 years growing. This is where the gloves came off. If you are enjoying this payback, hit that subscribe button, because the trap I set for Declan was beautiful. The silence from my parents and Declan did not last long, but as I expected, they did not reach out to me directly. People who operate through manipulation never do the dirty work themselves when they can outsource it to their loyal followers. Enter the flying monkeys. Within just a few days of Declan threatening me with the injunction, my personal phone started blowing up with a barrage of texts, missed calls, and lengthy voicemails from extended family members who had not bothered to speak to me in years. Aunt Marin and my older cousin Grady led the charge, acting as Declan's personal attack dogs. Marin left me a staggering 5-minute voicemail that I listened to while sitting in the quiet of my kitchen, sipping black coffee. Her voice was shrill, trembling with manufactured outrage. She called me an ungrateful, malicious sociopath. She went on a long rant about how she always knew there was something deeply wrong with me. Sitting alone in my room as a kid, staring at computer screens and plotting against my own flesh and blood. She demanded I hand over whatever money I had stolen from Declan and apologize to my parents on my knees, or face the wrath of the entire extended family. Grady was even more aggressive. He sent me dozens of text messages in the middle of the night, accusing me of elder abuse, claiming I was trying to bankrupt the family out of sheer venomous jealousy. He said he was going to come down to my office, bypass my security, and teach me a physical lesson about respect and family hierarchy. I read his messages, feeling a strange, hollow sense of detachment. They were fighting a war with zero intelligence, armed only with the fabricated lies Declan had spoon-fed them. Declan had clearly spun a masterful narrative where he was the innocent victim, a struggling entrepreneur being bullied by a jealous, hoarding younger brother. Instead of blocking them or arguing back, I decided to use them. Grady was notoriously bad at keeping secrets and worshipped the ground Declan walked on. He was the perfect, unwitting conduit for misinformation. I needed Declan to make a move that would firmly, legally destroy his own credibility and put him away for good. The frivolous lawsuit was an annoyance, but it was merely a civil matter. I needed him to cross the line into federal crime, and I knew his arrogance would push him right over that edge if I laid out the right bait. I sat down with my lead software engineer in a secure room at CipherNet, and we spent 24 hours building a honeypot. A honeypot, for those who might not know, is essentially a decoy server. It looks like a high-value target, containing sensitive data and core infrastructure, but in reality, it is an isolated, heavily monitored sandbox designed specifically to trap intruders. We populated this decoy server with thousands of lines of dummy code, fake client acquisition lists, and a massive, fabricated database that looked incredibly valuable to an untrained eye. Then, I crafted a highly confidential internal memo. The memo stated that CipherNet was in the final stages of a 9-figure acquisition deal with a major, globally recognized tech conglomerate. It detailed that, for the purpose of a mandatory third-party audit, our core proprietary source code was being temporarily moved to an open, physical server with reduced security protocols for a strict 48-hour window. It was the digital equivalent of leaving a bank vault door wide open with a neon sign pointing at the gold bars. I printed the memo, crumpled the edges slightly to make it look authentic and mishandled, and took a grainy photo of it with my phone. I sent the photo to an untraceable burner email address, and then I forwarded that email directly to Grady with a fake subject line, pretending it was a leaked document from a disgruntled, underpaid employee. I added a short, cryptic note saying, if Declan wants his leverage, he better grab this before the sale closes and the money is gone forever. I knew Grady would forward it to Declan within seconds of opening it. And I knew Declan, desperate, cornered, and entirely ignorant of how actual enterprise cybersecurity works, would take the bait without a second thought. He thought he was a corporate mastermind, a visionary who could effortlessly outsmart the little brother who used to fix his broken Wi-Fi router. Sure enough, Barely 12 hours later, our internal monitoring software lit up the room with red alerts. Someone was actively trying to breach the honeypot. They were not using sophisticated methods. It was a loud, clumsy, brute force attack, likely executed by some cheap, freelance hacker Declan had scrambled to find on the dark web. I watched the access logs scroll across my massive monitor in real time. They bypassed the initial firewall, which we had intentionally left vulnerable, and broke into the fake server. They frantically downloaded the dummy source code. They downloaded the fake client list. And as they did, my proprietary security software went to work. It traced their IP address, captured their unique digital signature, and locked onto their exact physical location. But I wanted more than just the hacker. I had engineered the honeypot to run an aggressive, silent background diagnostic. On the infiltrating machine, the hacker was incredibly sloppy. Their system was littered with digital receipts. Within minutes, we traced the cryptocurrency payment for the hack directly back to a shell company registered in the state of Delaware. The owner of that shell company, Declan Hale. Declan thought he was hacking into my vault to steal my future. In reality, he was happily locking himself inside his own prison cell, and I had just thrown away the key. The trap was perfectly set, but I did not want to spring it in a quiet, sterile courtroom behind closed doors with only a judge and a few lawyers to witness it. Declan and my parents had spent my entire life humiliating me in public. They had diminished my achievements in front of our family at Thanksgiving dinners, in front of our friends, and in front of anyone who would listen. They wanted a public execution of my career and my reputation. I decided to give them the grandest stage possible. Every year, the city hosts a massive national security tech conference. It is a premier event for industry leaders, government defense contractors, and elite cybersecurity experts from around the country. This year, I was honored to be the keynote speaker. My presentation was scheduled for a Friday morning in the Grand Ballroom, with over 1,000 attendees seated in the audience, including potential venture capital investors, top-tier tech journalists, and corporate buyers. I knew Declan would not pass up an opportunity like this. He loved grand, theatrical gestures, and serving me with a revised, aggressive lawsuit in front of my esteemed peers, while loudly claiming I was a fraud who stole family money would be his ultimate fantasy. He wanted to break me where everyone could see, to prove once and for all that he was the superior son. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtain backstage, listening to the low, thrumming murmur of the massive crowd taking their seats. Reese, my director of physical security and a man built like a freight train, stood next to me. His arms were crossed, and his eyes were scanning the room through a narrow crack in the curtains. "They are here," Reese murmured, his voice tight and professional. "Left aisle, near the back doors. They just walked in." I peeked through the fabric. There they were. Declan, wearing a sharp new suit he definitely could not afford, looking impossibly smug and triumphant. Next to him was his cheap lawyer, nervously clutching a thick stack of legal papers to his chest. And trailing slightly behind them, looking anxious but resolute, was my father, Garrison. They had actually brought Garrison to witness my ultimate downfall. The cruelty of that decision solidified my resolve. I adjusted the microphone clipped to my lapel. "Let them get close," I told Reese, keeping my eyes on Declan's grinning face. "Do not stop them until I give the signal. I want them right at the front." The announcer called my name, his voice booming through the speakers, and I walked out onto the brightly lit stage. The applause was polite, professional, and loud. I stepped up to the acrylic podium, the massive projector screen behind me displaying the sleek CipherNet logo. I looked out over the sea of faces, instantly locking eyes with Kieran. Kieran is a prominent investigative journalist for a major tech publication. We had spoken a few times over the years, and I had personally invited him to sit in the front row, promising him an exclusive story that would make front-page news across the industry. He had his professional camera set up on a tripod and was already recording every frame. I started my speech talking clearly and confidently about the rapid evolution of data security, the vulnerabilities in modern cloud architecture, and the rising, invisible threats of corporate espionage. I spoke for about 5 minutes, letting the steady rhythm of the presentation settle the room into a quiet, attentive lull. Then, The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a violent, echoing thud. "Holden Hale." Declan's voice echoed through the massive room, amplified by the perfect acoustics of the ballroom. He was marching down the center aisle, holding a thick manila envelope high in the air like a trophy. The lawyer was practically jogging to keep up with his frantic pace, while Garrison lingered near the back doors, watching the spectacle with a mixture of immense pride and nervous anxiety. The audience turned in their seats, a wave of murmurs and confused whispers rippling through the crowd. Security guards stationed at the edge of the stage immediately tensed, reaching for their radios, but Reese stepped out from the wings and raised a single hand, signaling them to hold their positions and let the men approach. Declan reached the front of the stage, breathing heavily, grinning like a starving predator who had just cornered his prey. "Stop the presentation," Declan ordered, projecting his voice so the entire room, and Kieran's camera, could capture every word. "You are a fraud, Holden. You built this company on stolen family funds, and your time is officially up. We have a court order demanding the immediate surrender of your equity, pending a federal investigation for intellectual property theft and fraud." Loud gasps rippled through the audience. People began whispering furiously. Kieran leaned forward, his camera lens focused directly on Declan's flushed, arrogant face. "I did not panic. I did not yell back. I just leaned into the microphone, my voice calm, smooth, and perfectly steady. A federal investigation. Declan? For intellectual property theft?" I paused, letting the silence stretch. That is a very serious accusation to make in a room full of the nation's top cybersecurity experts and journalists. "I have the proof right here," Declan yelled, slamming the heavy envelope onto the edge of the stage with a dramatic thud. "You tried to sell the company behind the family's back to hide the money. We secured your source code to protect our rightful assets. It is over. Step down from that podium right now." I looked down at him, and then I smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that finally, for the first time, made Declan's grin falter. "You secured my source code?" I asked, my voice echoing through the speakers. "You mean you hired a third-party contractor to illegally breach a secure corporate server and download proprietary enterprise data?" Declan puffed out his chest, completely oblivious to the trap snapping shut around his ankles. "It is not illegal if I am the rightful owner of the company. We had to protect the family investment from a thief." I nodded slowly, letting his clear, uncoerced public confession hang in the air for everyone to digest. "Well," I said, tapping a single key on my laptop, "let us take a detailed look at what you actually secured." The massive screen behind me flickered. The sleek CipherNet logo vanished, instantly replaced by a dense, scrolling wall of text, highlighted code, and stark graphics. It was not source code. It was a comprehensive, devastating security audit, automatically translated into plain English so every single person in the audience could understand exactly what they were looking at. At the very top of the screen, flashing in massive, bold red letters, read the words, "Unauthorized breach attempt detected." Below that alarming header, the screen displayed a chronological timeline. It showed the exact hour, minute, and second Declan's hired hacker breached the honeypot server. It displayed the raw IP address, the physical GPS location of the hacker's computer setup, and a damning digital trail of breadcrumbs leading directly back to the shell company. I had the cryptocurrency wire transfer receipt displayed in high definition on the 30-foot screen, using a digital red marker to highlight Declan's digital signature authorizing the massive payment to a known, blacklisted cybercriminal operating on the dark web. The grand ballroom fell utterly silent. The sheer weight of the evidence was suffocating. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the projector and the rapid clicking of Kieran's camera shutter. But I was not done. I had promised a spectacle, and I was going to deliver. I hit the spacebar to advance to the next slide. "You see, Declan," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings, "when your guy broke into my decoy server, my system went to work on his. And the funny thing about cheap, desperate hackers is they keep very detailed, unencrypted records of their employers to ensure they get paid. We did not just find the receipt for this specific attack. We found your entire financial portfolio on his hard drive. He was vetting you. The screen shifted again. This time, it displayed a brutal, undeniable spreadsheet of Declan's current reality. It showed the repeated defaults on his luxury real estate loans. It showed the multiple pending lawsuits from contractors for breach of contract. And right in the center, highlighted in glowing yellow, was the staggering sum of his total liabilities. $12,500,000 in toxic, unrecoverable debt. Declan's face drained of all color. The smug arrogance melted away, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. He stumbled back a step, staring up at the giant screen with wide, horrified eyes. "Turn that off," he whispered, his voice cracking, no longer projecting to the room. "Turn it off right now." "No," I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. "We are just getting to the family part of the presentation. You talk a lot about family assets, Declan. Let us look at how you actually treat them." I hit the final slide. The screen displayed a digitized, high-resolution copy of a mortgage document. I pulled a laser pointer from my pocket and circled the address at the top of the page. It was my parents' house. I circled the date. It was from exactly 3 weeks ago. And then I dragged the red dot down to the signature line, where Garrison's name was scrawled in handwriting that clearly, undeniably belonged to Declan. To fund his legal harassment campaign against me, and to artificially inflate his failing company to secure more loans, my brother forged our father's signature to take out a massive second mortgage, effectively signing away the house our parents had lived in for 30 years. Furthermore, I continued, my voice ringing out over the stunned, breathless crowd. He quietly drained their retirement accounts. Every last penny. He bankrupted his own parents to pay a cybercriminal to steal from his brother. A collective, audible gasp tore through the audience. People covered their mouths. Kieran the journalist was practically vibrating with excitement, his camera capturing every single second of the broadcast, ensuring this would be on the front page of every tech site by noon. At the back of the room, a harrowing guttural sound broke the silence. It was Garrison. He was staring at the screen, his chest heaving, his hands trembling violently. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. He staggered forward down the aisle, clutching his chest, his eyes fixed on the forged signature that had just destroyed his life. "Declan?" Garrison choked out, his voice a broken, devastating rasp. "Tell me that is a lie. Tell me you did not take the house." Declan could not speak. He was hyperventilating, looking desperately at the exit doors, finally realizing he was trapped. The golden child's crown had just turned into handcuffs. Panic overtook him. He lunged forward, trying to scramble onto the stage to physically smash my laptop, but Reese was already moving. Reese caught Declan by the collar midair, spun him around with brutal efficiency, and pinned him face down against the hard floor. The cheap lawyer dropped his briefcase, turned around, and literally sprinted out the back doors, abandoning his client to save his own career. "Someone call the police," I said calmly into the microphone, looking out at the stunned crowd. "We have a public confession to corporate espionage and wire fraud." As the faint sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, drawing closer to the convention center, I looked down at my brother, pinned to the floor and sobbing, and my father, weeping openly in the aisle. The war was over. I had not just defended my fortress. I had leveled theirs to dust. The fallout from the conference was immediate, brutal, and profoundly satisfying to witness. You simply cannot publicly confess to hiring a hacker to steal corporate data in a room packed full of cybersecurity professionals and elite journalists and expect to walk away scot-free. The police arrived within 10 minutes, storming through the ballroom doors. Declan was dragged out of the convention center in handcuffs, weeping uncontrollably, like a child, begging Garrison to do something, to call a lawyer, to save him. But Garrison just sat heavily in a chair in the lobby, staring blankly at the patterned carpet, too broken and devastated to even speak a word to his golden boy. Kieran's expansive article hit the internet exactly an hour later. The headline was bold and unforgiving: "The Golden Child's Heist. How a real estate fraudster bankrupted his parents and tried to hack a $50 million empire." The story went incredibly viral. It was the perfect, intoxicating storm of corporate intrigue, bitter family betrayal, and spectacular public humiliation. By Monday morning, the SEC had officially frozen every single asset tied to Declan's name and launched a full-scale, aggressive investigation into his real estate firm. The local authorities added severe charges of forgery and elder financial abuse regarding my parents' second mortgage and their vanished retirement accounts. During his arraignment, Declan was denied bail, deemed a severe flight risk due to his extensive, crushing debts and the sheer severity of the federal corporate espionage charges hanging over his head. As for the flying monkeys, they scattered into the shadows like roaches when the kitchen lights turn on. Aunt Marin frantically deleted her vicious voicemails and suddenly pretended she had never taken Declan's side, claiming she was manipulated. My cousin Grady deactivated all his social media accounts after his friends and co-workers started sharing Kieran's article on his timeline. The extended family members who had called me a sociopath just days prior were suddenly very, very quiet. But the hardest, most devastating blow landed precisely where it was always going to land. 30 days after the conference, the bank officially foreclosed on Garrison and Blythe's home. The second mortgage Declan had secretly taken out was in massive default, and without their retirement savings, they had absolutely no way to pay the staggering monthly installments. The house I grew up in, the house where I was repeatedly told I was worthless and selfish, was seized by the bank. 2 days before their scheduled eviction date, the receptionist at my office called my desk. She sounded deeply uncomfortable and hesitant. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, "your parents are in the lobby. They do not have an appointment, but they are refusing to leave the premises. They are crying. They say it is a matter of life and death." I took a deep, steadying breath, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. "Send them up," I replied. They walked into my office looking like hollow ghosts. Garrison had seemingly aged 10 years in a single month. His broad shoulders were slumped, his face pale, deeply lined and drawn. Blythe was trembling violently, clutching a cheap canvas handbag to her chest, her eyes red and swollen from weeks of endless crying. They stood awkwardly in front of my massive oak desk, surrounded by the sleek, modern architecture of the company they had actively tried to help Declan steal. "Holden," Garrison started, his voice cracking pitifully. We have nowhere to go. The bank is coming to change the locks on Friday morning. We have nothing left." Blythe burst into loud, jagged tears. "Please, Holden," she pleaded. "We know we made terrible mistakes. We were blind to what your brother was doing. We trusted him too much. But we are still your parents. We are a family. You cannot let us live on the street. You have so much money now. Please just pay off the bank. Save the house." I sat back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together. I looked at the two people who had shaped my entire early life through their consistent neglect, their harsh criticism, and their casual cruelty. I searched my heart, digging deep, looking for a shred of sympathy, a lingering sense of familial duty, or even a spark of vindictive anger. I looked at the people who disowned me a month ago and realized I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just silence. The emotional tether had been completely severed. "You disowned me," I said, my voice perfectly flat and devoid of emotion. "You looked me in the eye in your living room and told me I was no son of yours. You chose Declan. You handed him your blind trust, you fed him your retirement, and he used it to destroy you. That is not my mistake to fix." Garrison dropped heavily to his knees, a proud, arrogant man, kneeling on my office floor, weeping openly. "Please," he begged, his dignity entirely gone. "We have nothing. We will die out there." "I am not saving the house," I said, leaning forward. "The house is gone. But I am not going to let you starve on the street. I have terms, and you will accept them right now, or you will walk out of here and never speak to me again." Garrison looked up from the floor, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope. "Anything," he whispered, his voice trembling. "We will do anything you ask, Holden. Just please do not let us freeze." I opened the heavy bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh, meticulously prepared legal file. I had instructed my legal team to draft this weeks ago, anticipating this exact, inevitable moment. I slid the thick file across the polished wood of the desk. First, I said, addressing the massive disaster Declan left in his wake. Declan's LLC has officially filed for bankruptcy. His half-finished luxury condos and empty dirt lots are currently being liquidated by the state to pay off his furious creditors. I am purchasing all of his commercial real estate properties. The bank has eagerly agreed to sell them to me for exactly $1 each, plus the assumption of a small fraction of the debt, which I will clear instantly this afternoon. Blythe stopped crying for a second, looking genuinely confused. Why would you buy his failed, bankrupt buildings? She asked, wiping her nose. Because I am tearing every single one of them down, I replied coldly. I am converting the lots into affordable housing units and community tech centers, run entirely through a non-profit trust one established. Every brick of his fake, arrogant empire will be repurposed to actually help people, something he never cared to do in his entire miserable life. I pointed a firm finger at the documents sitting in front of Garrison. Second, the two of you. I have established a strict, irrevocable trust fund. I have seeded it with enough capital to cover your basic living expenses for the rest of your natural lives. However, you will have zero access to the principal cash. The trust is managed by an independent, aggressive fiduciary who answers only to me. I outlined the stark reality of their new lives. The trust had already purchased a small, modest two-bedroom apartment in a safe, working-class neighborhood on the far outskirts of the city. The trust would automatically pay their utility bills, their property taxes, and provide a strict, unchangeable weekly allowance for basic groceries and essential medical expenses. There would be no luxury cars, no country club memberships, no vacations, and absolutely no excess cash for them to funnel to Declan's commissary account when he inevitably went to federal prison. You will live comfortably, but simply, I told them, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. And you will never, ever ask me for another dime. If you attempt to challenge the terms of this trust in court, or if you contact the media to complain, the fund will be immediately liquidated and donated to charity, leaving you with absolutely nothing. Do you understand? Blythe stared at the paperwork, her hands shaking violently. A two-bedroom apartment? She mumbled, the lingering, deeply ingrained entitlement trying to fight its way through her current desperation. But where will we host Thanksgiving dinner? Where will we put the good china? I stared at her until she physically withered under my cold gaze. You will not be hosting Thanksgiving, Blythe. You have no one left to invite. Your friends are gone. Your family wants nothing to do with you. Garrison reached up, grabbed an expensive pen from my desk, and signed the papers with trembling, frantic hands. He did not read the terms. He just signed every page, broken and thoroughly defeated. Thank you, he whispered, tears dripping onto the legal paper. You are a good son, Holden. Do not call me that, I said, swiftly pulling the papers back across the desk. I am doing this because I refuse to carry the guilt of watching you freeze in an alley. But we are not a family. We are done. Now get out of my office. They stood up, leaning heavily on each other for support, and slowly shuffled out the door, looking smaller than they ever had. I watched them go, feeling a massive, invisible weight permanently lift off my chest. An hour later, my office door opened again. This time it was Uncle Callum. He walked in, took one long look at my face, and walked over to the small crystal bar cart in the corner of the room. He poured 2 generous glasses of expensive bourbon, walked over to my desk, and set one down gently in front of me. I saw them leaving the building downstairs, Callum said softly, taking a seat in the chair Garrison had just vacated. They looked like they had been through a brutal war. They lost the war, I corrected him, picking up the glass and taking a slow sip of the burning liquid. I set up a trust for them. A small apartment, groceries, utilities. Nothing more. Callum nodded slowly, a look of profound, quiet respect settling on his weathered face. You did the right thing, kid, he said softly. More than they deserved, but exactly what a man of deep character would do. You did not let them drag you down into their toxic mud. You protected your castle, and you showed mercy without showing an ounce of weakness. He raised his glass toward the ceiling. To $500 well spent. I clinked my heavy glass against his. To $500 well spent. It has been exactly a year since that fateful day in my office. A full 12 months since the dust finally settled and the lingering, toxic echoes of my family's legacy faded into permanent silence. Declan eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of corporate espionage, wire fraud, and forgery. He was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. Without Garrison and Blythe's money to afford a high-powered, slick defense team, he had to rely on an overworked public defender who took one look at my presentation and quickly advised him to take a plea deal to avoid a 20-year sentence. I am told through the grapevine that he currently works in the prison laundry room. The golden child, finally learning how to fold his own clothes and scrub floors. Garrison and Blythe live in the small apartment I provided for them. From what the strict trust manager tells me, they live a very quiet, deeply isolated life. Their entire social circle abandoned them the exact moment their bank accounts hit zero and their names were dragged through the mud in the press. They spend their endless days watching daytime television and walking aimlessly around the local park. They have sent a few handwritten letters to my office, profusely apologizing, begging for a short visit, asking if we can try to somehow rebuild our shattered relationship. I have never opened a single one of them. I put them straight through the heavy-duty shredder unopened, leaving the painful past exactly where it belongs. As for me, my life has changed dramatically, but the core of who I am remains exactly the same. CipherNet has grown exponentially. We successfully secured that 9-figure acquisition deal I had bluffed about during the honeypot trap, though I ruthlessly structured the contracts so I retain full creative control and the vast majority of voting rights. My personal net worth has skyrocketed past anything I ever imagined, but I still do not wear tailored, restrictive suits or drive flashy, imported cars. I did, however, significantly upgrade my living situation. I bought a stunning penthouse overlooking the entire city skyline. Not to show off to anyone, but simply because I love the view. I love standing out on the glass balcony at night, looking down at the endless grid of glowing lights, the distant hum of the city, and knowing deep in my bones that I built my place in this world with my own 2 hands, my own sharp mind, and my own relentless hard work. I used to honestly think that massive financial success was the ultimate form of revenge. I thought that becoming a millionaire would somehow magically force my parents to respect me, that it would make them wake up and realize they had chosen the wrong son all along. But that was a dangerous mental trap. Searching for validation from people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding you is exactly like trying to draw fresh water from a dry, poisoned well. It only leaves you exhausted, bitter, and endlessly thirsty. The greatest victory in this entire ordeal wasn't the money. It wasn't the terrified look on Declan's face when the federal agents arrested him. And it wasn't the grim satisfaction of watching Garrison and Blythe sign those restrictive trust papers. The greatest victory was the profound, unbreakable peace that came with realizing my self-worth is not dictated by their flawed approval. I am no longer the invisible child cowering in the corner. I am the sole architect of my own reality. I look around my beautiful, quiet apartment, and I feel nothing but immense gratitude. There is no yelling here. There is no manipulation, no subtle, cutting digs at my career, no heavy expectation that I will sacrifice my happiness to feed someone else's fragile ego. I have deliberately surrounded myself with people who genuinely care about me. Friends who have been there since the early, struggling days, loyal employees who trust my vision, and Uncle Callum, who comes over every Sunday afternoon to watch the game and drink expensive bourbon. They say blood is thicker than water, but loyalty is thicker than blood. A shared genetic code does not give someone the divine right to abuse you, steal from you, or demand your lifelong subservience. Family is supposed to be a safe sanctuary, not a constant, grueling war zone. I saved my parents from living on the freezing streets, but I will never let them sit at my dinner table again. I drew a firm boundary made of solid steel and concrete, and I will defend it for the rest of my life. So, Reddit, I turn the final question over to you. I took down my treacherous brother. I exiled my enabling parents to a life of stark mediocrity, and I walked away from the wreckage without shedding a single tear. Am I the villain here? Did I go too far with my retribution? Or did I give them exactly the justice they spent a lifetime earning? If you stayed until the very end, thank you. Let me know your honest verdict in the comments down below. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button for more stories. Share this video with anyone who needs a harsh but necessary reminder that you do not owe the wolves your life just because they happen to share your last name. See you in the next one.